I always thought my sister's issues would eventually resolve themselves. That we'd grow closer as adults, maybe even laugh about our childhood drama over coffee someday. But that dream died the moment my mother called me during my final semester of college. My name is Sawyer, and I was 3 months away from graduating with my business degree when everything fell apart. I was sitting in the campus library, surrounded by marketing textbooks and empty coffee cups, when my phone buzzed. "Honey, we need to talk about your tuition," my mother said, her voice carrying that familiar tension I'd grown to dread. "There's been a change of plans." I felt my stomach drop. "What do you mean?" "Harper needs intensive therapy. The new program we found. It's expensive, but it's supposed to be revolutionary. Your father and I have decided to redirect your college fund to cover it." The fluorescent lights suddenly felt too bright. My hands went numb. "Mom, I'm 3 months from graduating. I can't just..." "I know it's not ideal," she cut in, using the same tone she'd used countless times when choosing Harper's needs over mine. "But your sister is in crisis. She tried to hurt herself again last week." Course she did. Harper's attempts always seemed to coincide with moments when attention shifted away from her. Like my high school graduation when she swallowed 3 Tylenol and called it an overdose. Or my college acceptance when she scratched her arms with her fingernails and claimed it was a cry for help. "I have rent to pay," I said, my voice shaking. "Books, food. I've been counting on that money." "You're so capable, honey. You'll figure something out. Maybe take out some loans? Harper doesn't have your resilience. She needs us." I stared at my marketing project, the words blurring together. 3 years of perfect grades, working part-time jobs, doing everything right, and none of it mattered. 'Cause Harper needed something, and in our family, Harper's needs were always paramount. "When did she try to hurt herself?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Last Thursday." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "The day after I told you about my job offer in Chicago?" My mother's silence spoke volumes. "Sawyer, please don't make this harder than it needs to be. We're family. We have to support each other." "Right," I whispered. "Family." I ended the call and sat there, watching students pass by with their normal lives and normal problems. My phone buzzed again, a text from Harper this time. "Sorry about your tuition, sad face. But maybe this means you'll stay closer to home? I miss my big sister." The message was punctuated with heart emojis, as if she were discussing something as trivial as borrowed clothes. I could picture her smug smile, the way she'd bat her eyes at our parents when they inevitably praised her for reaching out to me. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Ethan, my fiancé. "Still on for dinner tonight?" I stared at his message, thinking about how excited he'd been about the Chicago opportunity, about the apartment listings we'd been browsing together, about all our plans that now seemed to be crumbling because my sister couldn't stand the thought of me succeeding. Something shifted inside me then. Maybe it was the casualness of Harper's message, or the way my mother had dismissed years of my hard work, or just the accumulated weight of a lifetime being second best. But sitting there in that library, surrounded by the remnants of my carefully planned future, I made a decision. I was done being the responsible one. Done sacrificing my dreams to feed my sister's endless need for attention. Done playing by rules that always seemed to change in Harper's favor. I texted Ethan back. "Actually, can we meet now? There's something I need to talk to you about." It was time to write my own rules. And if my family didn't like them, well, maybe that was their problem to figure out. The mandatory family dinner felt like walking into a minefield. I'd spent the afternoon with Ethan, planning how to handle my sudden financial crisis, but now I had to face my family and pretend everything was normal, as if they hadn't just pulled the rug out from under my entire future. Harper was already holding court at the dinner table when I arrived, regaling our parents with stories about her new therapy group. She wore a carefully curated outfit that made her look younger, more vulnerable, a trick she'd perfected over the years. "Sawyer," She jumped up to hug me, her voice syrupy sweet. I was just telling Mom and Dad about Dr. Matthews. He says I'm making real progress. I returned the hug stiffly, catching a whiff of her expensive perfume, probably another gift from our parents. That's great. My father looked up from his phone, offering a distracted smile. Sit down, Githa. Your mother made pot roast. The table was set with the good china, another sign that this was Harper's show. Mom only broke out the fancy plates when she wanted to make everything seem perfect and normal. So, my mother said, serving the food, Harper was thinking about taking some community college classes next semester. Isn't that wonderful? I stabbed a potato with more force than necessary. Interesting timing. Harper's eyes flickered to me, a ghost of a smirk playing at her lips. Well, seeing how hard you've worked really inspired me. I want to follow in your footsteps, big sister. Speaking of school, my father interjected, have you figured out your situation yet, Sawyer? You mean the situation where you pulled my funding 3 months before graduation? The words came out sharper than I intended. My mother's fork clattered against her plate. Sawyer, we discussed this. Your sister needs help. I know. I turned to Harper. How did you try it this time? What? To hurt yourself. Mom said you tried again last week. What was it this time? Pills? Crutches? Or did you just threaten it? Sawyer! My father's voice carried a warning. That's enough. Harper's lower lip trembled, right on cue. I can't believe you'd be so cruel. You know how hard this is for me. Hard for you. I laughed. What about how hard it is for everyone else? Do you even care that you're destroying my chance to graduate? I didn't ask them to do that. Harper protested, but her eyes gleamed with satisfaction. My mother reached for Harper's hand. Sweetheart, don't get upset. Dr. Matthews said we need to avoid triggers. Of course, I cut in. We wouldn't want to trigger Harper. Heaven forbid she face any consequences for her actions. That's not fair, my father said. Your sister is sick. Is she? Or is she just really good at manipulating everyone? Harper pushed back from the table, tears flowing perfectly down her cheeks. I can't do this. I'm having an anxiety attack. As if on cue, my parents rushed to comfort her. I watched them fuss over her, remembering all the times I'd needed support but stayed quiet because Harper needed attention more. I'm leaving, I announced, standing up. Don't be dramatic, my mother sighed. Sit down and finish your dinner. No. I grabbed my purse. I have to go figure out how to save my future since you've decided Harper's latest crisis is more important. Harper's sob grew louder. See what you've done, my mother hissed. She was doing so well, and now? Now what? I challenged. Now she'll need more therapy? More attention? More of my tuition money? As I turned to leave, Harper called out, I'm sorry you're hurting, Sawyer. Maybe you should join my therapy group. We could heal together. I paused at the door, taking in the scene. Harper, the perfect victim, surrounded by our concerned parents. My half-eaten dinner growing cold. The familiar tableau of my family's dysfunction. You know what, Harper? Keep the money. Keep all of it. But remember something, I won't always be around for you to use as a stepping stone. I walked out, ignoring my mother's calls to come back. In my car, my phone lit up with a text from Harper. I really am trying to get better. Don't you want me to get better? I deleted the message without responding. For the first time in my life, I didn't care if Harper got better. I just wanted to get free. After the disastrous family dinner, I sought refuge at my grandmother Evelyn's house. She'd always been my safe harbor, the only one who saw through Harper's performances. But when I arrived, I found her sitting at her kitchen table, looking more troubled than I'd ever seen her. I was hoping you'd come by, she said, pushing a cup of tea toward me. We need to talk about your sister. My stomach clenched. What did she do? She came to me last week, crying about needing money for some experimental therapy. Said your parents couldn't afford it. Evelyn's hands trembled slightly as she lifted her cup. I gave her $5,000. You what? The room seemed to tilt. Grandma, that therapy money was supposed to come from my tuition. I know that now. Her voice hardened. I called Linda yesterday to ask how Harper's new treatment was going. Imagine my surprise when she had no idea what I was talking about. A knock at the door interrupted us. Through the window, I saw Harper standing on the porch, wearing the same vulnerable outfit from dinner. Evelyn's expression turned to steel. Perfect timing, she muttered, moving to answer. Harper breezed in like she owned the place. Grandma, I can explain everything, oh. She faltered when she saw me. Sawyer? What are you doing here? Funny, I was about to ask you the same thing. I came to talk to Grandma about the therapy program. Harper's voice wavered perfectly. There's been a misunderstanding. Stop. Evelyn's command cut through the air. Where's my money, Harper? I spent it, Harper admitted, tears already forming. But it was for something important. I needed a new car. I interrupted, remembering the sleek vehicle she'd been driving at dinner. Those designer clothes? Or was it that perfume that costs more than my textbooks? Harper's facade cracked for a moment, revealing something ugly underneath. You don't understand. Mom and Dad always gave you everything. I just wanted. They gave me everything? I stood up so fast my chair scraped across the floor. They just took away my entire future for you. Because I need help, Harper wailed, but her eyes remained dry despite her theatrical sobs. I'm sick, Sawyer. Why can't you understand that? The only thing wrong with you is that you're a pathological liar, Evelyn said quietly. I've watched you manipulate this family for years, but stealing from me? That's a new low. Harper switched tactics, her vulnerability morphing into anger. Fine. Keep your money. I'll tell Mom and Dad how you both attacked me when I came here seeking help. They'll believe me. They always do. Get out. Evelyn's voice was steel. And don't come back until you're ready to tell the truth. After Harper left, I sat with my grandmother in silence. My phone buzzed with messages from my mother, no doubt already receiving Harper's version of events. I'm sorry, Evelyn said finally. I should have seen through her act. Everyone falls for it eventually. I stared into my cold tea. That's her superpower. Not anymore. Evelyn reached for her checkbook. I'm giving you the money for your tuition. Grandma, no. I can't. Yes, you can. And you will. She started writing. I've enabled Harper's behavior by staying quiet all these years. It's time someone in this family stood up for you. My phone buzzed again, a text from Harper. Hope you're happy. Mom and Dad are furious about how you and Grandma treated me. Good luck explaining yourself. I showed Evelyn the message, and she shook her head. You know what happens to people who constantly cry wolf, Sawyer? Eventually, the wolf really comes, and no one's left to help them. Looking at my grandmother's determined face, I felt something shift inside me. Harper had finally overplayed her hand. She'd gotten greedy, thinking she could manipulate everyone indefinitely. But she'd forgotten one thing. Every con has its expiration date. I took out my phone and started typing evidence. Dates, incidents, patterns of behavior. Every manipulation, every fake crisis, every stolen opportunity. It was time to show my parents who their perfect daughter really was. What are you doing? Evelyn asked. Writing my own version of the story, I replied. And this time I'm not letting Harper edit it. The evidence I'd gathered against Harper sat like a loaded gun in my phone. For 3 days, I debated whether to pull the trigger. Then my mother called with news that made the decision for me. We're putting the house up for sale, she announced without preamble. The therapy program Harper needs is in California. I nearly dropped my coffee. You're moving across the country? We all are. Your father found a position there, and I think a fresh start would be good for everyone. Harper's so excited about it. Course she was. 'Cause I'd just signed a lease on an apartment near campus, committed to local job interviews, made plans with Ethan. When were you planning to tell me this? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Well, honey, we assumed you want to come with us. Family should stick together. I laughed, a hollow sound that echoed through my empty dorm room. Right. Like you stuck with me when you took my tuition money? That's not fair. Your sister stole $5,000 from Grandma Evelyn. I cut in. Did she tell you that part? Silence crackled over the line. Then Harper explained that situation. She was desperate and Evelyn misunderstood. Stop. My voice shook. Just stop. I have proof, Mom. Bank statements, text messages, everything. Harper's been lying to all of us. Don't. Her voice turned sharp. Don't you dare try to hurt your sister. She's fragile right now. Fragile. I opened my evidence folder. Let me read you something. Last month, while you thought Harper was at therapy, she was actually... I don't want to hear it. My mother's voice rose to a near shout. Why can't you just support her? Why do you have to make everything so difficult? The words hit like a physical blow. 23 years of being the good daughter, of swallowing my needs, of watching Harper manipulate and destroy. And I was the difficult one? You know what? I said quietly. You're right. I am making things difficult. So let me make it really simple. I'm not going to California. I'm not giving up my life for Harper anymore. And if you sell that house, the house I grew up in, the house where Dad promised we'd always have a home, then don't expect me to ever come back. You don't mean that. But I heard the uncertainty in her voice. We're family. No, Mom. We're Harper's support system. There's a difference. After hanging up, I sat in the growing darkness of my dorm room. My phone lit up with texts from Harper. Can't wait to be roomies in Cali. Just like when we were kids. Though maybe you should stay here. Ethan might get lonely without you, winking face. The implied threat in that last message made my blood run cold. I knew Harper's pattern. If she couldn't control someone, she destroyed them. And now she was setting her sights on Ethan. I called him immediately. We need to talk. In person. I'm at work, he said. Everything okay? No. I looked at Harper's message again. Nothing's okay. An hour later, I sat across from Ethan in his car, parked outside the coffee shop where he worked. I showed him everything, the evidence, the texts, Harper's threat. Jesus, he whispered, scrolling through the messages. Your sister needs serious help. She's getting it. In California. I took a deep breath. My parents are selling the house and moving there with her. His head snapped up. What about us? Our plans. They expect me to go with them. To give up everything here and start over where Harper can have a fresh start. I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his glove compartment and pulled out a small box. I was going to wait until your graduation, but... He opened it, revealing a simple engagement ring. Maybe we need our own fresh start. I stared at the ring, then at Harper's threatening message still glowing on my phone. In that moment, I realized I had to make a choice. Keep playing Harper's game and lose everything, or finally start fighting back. I took the ring. Harper wanted a war? Fine. But this time, I wasn't going to be the only casualty. The engagement ring felt heavy on my finger as I walked into my childhood home one last time. My parents were hosting a farewell dinner before their move to California, and I decided it was time to make my own announcement. Ethan squeezed my hand as we approached the front door. You sure about this? He whispered. I nodded, though my stomach churned. Through the window, I could see Harper helping Mom set the table, playing the perfect daughter role. She'd been suspiciously quiet since her threat about Ethan, which only made me more nervous. The moment we stepped inside, Harper's eyes locked onto my ring. Her smile flickered for just a second before spreading wider. "Oh my God, are you engaged?" Before I could answer, she threw her arms around me in an enthusiastic hug. "I'm so happy for you," she whispered in my ear, then added so only I could hear. "Though it's a shame you won't get to have the wedding at home, since we're selling it and all." My mother's reaction was more subdued. She stared at the ring, then at Ethan as if seeing him for the first time. "This is unexpected, is it?" I challenged. "We've been together 3 years. But with the move to California—" "I'm not going to California," I cut in. "I thought I made that clear." My father emerged from his study, drawn by the tension in our voices. "What's going on?" "Sawyer and Ethan are engaged," Harper announced, her voice dripping with sweetness. "Isn't it wonderful? Though the timing seems a bit rushed. Almost like a desperate attempt to stay here." "It's not desperate," Ethan said firmly. "I've been planning this for months." "Of course you have," Harper smiled, but her eyes were cold. "I just hope Sawyer isn't using you to avoid her family responsibilities." "Responsibilities?" I laughed. "You mean enabling your lies? Watching you manipulate everyone? Giving up my future so you can have another fresh start?" "Sawyer," my mother warned. "Your sister is trying to get better." "No, she's not." I pulled out my phone. "She's trying to control everyone. And I can prove it." Harper's face darkened. "Mom, she's trying to hurt me again. I can feel an attack coming on." "Stop it." I slammed my hand on the table, making everyone jump. "Just stop. I have evidence of everything. The money you stole from Grandma. Fake therapy sessions. The way you time your episodes whenever something good happens to me." "That's enough," my father started, but I was done being silenced. "No, it's not enough. You're selling our home, the home where Mom raised us, where Dad taught me to ride a bike, where we had every Christmas, because Harper wants attention. You're abandoning everything we built here because she's throwing another tantrum. And I'm done pretending it's okay." Harper's facade cracked. "You think you're so perfect, don't you? The responsible one. The good daughter. But you're just jealous because Mom and Dad love me more." "Love you more?" I felt something break inside me. "They don't love you more, Harper. They're terrified of you. Of what you'll do if they don't give you everything you want." "Sawyer, please," my mother begged. "You're making things worse." "No, Mom. Harper makes things worse. She always has. And now she's threatening Ethan because she can't stand the idea of me being happy without her." The room went silent. My father turned to Harper. "What is she talking about?" But Harper had already switched to victim mode, tears streaming down her face. "I can't believe you'd accuse me of that. I'm your sister. I love you. I just want us to be a family." "We're not a family," I said quietly. "We're your audience. And I'm done watching the show." I took Ethan's hand and walked toward the door. Behind me, I heard Harper call out, "If you leave now, don't expect to be welcome back." I turned one last time, taking in the scene. My sister's calculated tears, my mother's desperate expression, my father's confusion. The home that had become a stage for Harper's endless drama. "Don't worry," I said. "I won't be back. But remember this moment, Harper. Remember that you chose this." As we left, I heard Harper start to wail and my parents rushing to comfort her. But for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty walking away from her crisis. I felt free. 3 weeks after the confrontation, my parents left for California. I thought I'd feel relieved, but instead I felt hollow. Empty houses have a way of echoing with memories, and as I helped Grandma Evelyn clean out the last of their belongings, each room felt like a punch to the gut. "They didn't even say goodbye," I muttered, folding a forgotten blanket. "Just packed up and left." Evelyn squeezed my shoulder, but before she could respond, my phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? Is this Sawyer Bennett? A woman's professional voice. This is Dr. Reynolds from Mercy Hospital. We have your sister Harper here. My blood ran cold. What happened? She was found unconscious in her hotel room. Parent overdose. Your parents are still in transit to California, and you're listed as her emergency contact. Course I was. They probably hadn't updated the paperwork yet. Is she? I couldn't finish the question. She's stable, but she's asking for you. She seems quite distressed. I looked at Evelyn, who had heard enough to understand. She nodded grimly. Go. I'll finish here. 20 minutes later, I stood outside Harper's hospital room, watching through the window as she lay there, looking smaller and more vulnerable than I'd ever seen her. A nurse approached me. She's been asking for you repeatedly. Though. The nurse hesitated. You should know she tried to refuse treatment at first. Said she wanted to make Sawyer sorry. My hands started shaking. Even now, even here, it was all manipulation. But what if it wasn't? What if this time was real? Harper's eyes found me through the window. She lifted one hand weakly, and for a moment I saw the little sister who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. I walked in. You came, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. I didn't think you would. What happened, Harper? I couldn't do it. Couldn't leave knowing you hate me. Her voice cracked. Mom and Dad don't understand me like you do. They never have. Stop it. My voice was harder than I intended. Just stop. Are you really hurt, or is this another performance? Her face changed just slightly. Why do you always think I'm lying? I could have died. Did you want to die, or did you want me to feel guilty? She didn't answer immediately, which was an answer in itself. I called Mom and Dad, she said instead. They're turning around. Coming back. They said you should stay with me until they get here. Course they were. Course Harper had found a way to drag them back, to keep everyone dancing to her tune. No, I said quietly. What? I said no. I'm not staying. I'm not playing this game anymore. Harper's monitor started beeping faster. You're going to leave me alone? After I almost died. You didn't almost die. The nurse told me they pumped your stomach. You took just enough pills to seem serious, but not enough to do real damage. You timed it perfectly, didn't you? Right when Mom and Dad were too far away to come back quickly, but not so far that they couldn't turn around. You're cruel, she spat, dropping the vulnerable act. This is why I did it. To show everyone who you really are. I stepped closer to her bed. No, Harper. This shows everyone who you are. And I'm done being your audience. If you leave now, she called after me, I'll tell them everything was your fault, that you pushed me to this. They'll believe me. They always do. I paused at the door. You know what the difference is between us, Harper? I don't care if they believe you anymore. But walking out of that hospital was the hardest thing I'd ever done. My phone exploded with messages, from my parents, from relatives, from family friends. All of them telling me what a terrible sister I was, how Harper needed me, how family should stick together. I turned my phone off. Later that night, curled up in Ethan's arms, I finally let myself cry. Not for Harper, not really. But for the sister I never had and for the family I'd needed but never got. You did the right thing, Ethan whispered. Then why does it feel like she won? Because this isn't the end, he said. It's just the beginning. He was right. This was just the beginning. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what came next. I should have known Harper wasn't done. 2 days after the hospital incident, I came home from work to find Ethan's car in our driveway and Harper's new BMW parked behind it. My hand shook as I unlocked the door. The scene inside froze my blood. Harper was perched on our couch, wearing a dress I recognized from my own closet. Ethan stood by the window, his face pale, keeping as much distance between them as possible. "Oh, hi, sis." Harper's voice dripped honey. "I was just telling Ethan how worried I've been about you. About your anger issues." "Get out." My voice was surprisingly steady. "That's exactly what I mean," Harper turned to Ethan. "She's always so hostile. Mom and Dad are terrified she might do something dangerous. That's why they left, you know. It's not because of me." Ethan started to speak, but Harper cut him off, rising from the couch with practiced grace. "They told me everything, Ethan. How she's been jealous of me since we were kids. How she twists things to make me look bad." She stepped closer to him. "How she's probably using you to hurt them." "Stop it, Harper. I'm just trying to protect him." Another step closer. "He deserves to know what he's getting into. How you'll eventually turn on him just like you turned on us." I watched her move toward Ethan, recognizing her familiar pattern. The vulnerable pose, the wide eyes, the slight tremor in her voice that made people want to comfort her. "Show him," I said quietly. Harper froze. "What?" "Show him the texts. The ones where you threatened him. Show him the bank statements from Grandma's account. Show him the hospital records that prove you timed your overdose perfectly." "I don't know what you're talking about." But her mask slipped just slightly. "Yes, you do." I pulled out my phone. "Because I have copies of everything. Every manipulation. Every lie. Every calculated crisis." "You're doing it again," she said, but her voice wavered. "Twisting things. Making me the villain." "No, Harper. You did that yourself." I turned to Ethan. "Tell her what happened when she got here." Harper's eyes widened. Ethan cleared his throat. "She tried to kiss me. Said we could run away together, that you'd never have to know." "That's not, I didn't." Harper's performance crumbled. "He's lying. Just like you taught him to." "I recorded it," Ethan said quietly, holding up his phone. "All of it." Harper's face transformed, beauty twisting into something ugly. "You think this changes anything? Mom and Dad will never believe you. They'll say you manipulated the recording, that you set me up. They'll choose me. They always choose me." "I know," I said, and somehow it didn't hurt anymore. "But I'm not doing this for them. I'm doing it for me." "For you." She laughed, high and brittle. "You're nothing without me. You've spent your whole life being my sister. What are you without that? Free." I stepped closer, watching her flinch. "And you know what, Harper? I pity you. Because you'll spend your whole life trying to control people, and you'll never understand why they eventually all walk away." "They won't walk away. I won't let them." "Like you didn't let me?" I pulled out one final piece of paper, the restraining order I'd filed that morning. "This says differently." She snatched it, reading with trembling hands. "You can't do this. We're family." "No, Harper. We're not. We never really were." When she lunged at me, it wasn't entirely unexpected. But Ethan was faster, stepping between us. Harper stumbled back, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. "Get out," I said again. "And if you ever come near me or Ethan again, I'll release everything. Every recording. Every document. Every ugly truth." She backed toward the door, tears falling, real ones this time. "You'll regret this. You need me." "No," I said softly. "I really don't." After she left, Ethan held me while I shook, not from fear or sadness, but from relief. For the first time in my life, I'd seen Harper clearly. And more importantly, I'd finally seen myself. 6 months after Harper's final performance, I graduated with my business degree. Standing in my cap and gown, I searched the crowd out of habit, still half expecting to see my parents. Instead, I found Ethan and Grandma Evelyn beaming with genuine pride. "Your parents called," Evelyn told me later at the celebration dinner. "They wanted to know if you'd reconsider coming to California. Harper's apparently doing better." I stirred my coffee, watching the cream create patterns. "And what did you tell them?" "I told them they should have been here today." She reached into her purse, pulling out an envelope. "Which is why I want you to have this now instead of waiting." Inside was a letter from her lawyer. I read it twice, my hands shaking. "Grandma, this is your inheritance, yes. But I'm not waiting until I'm gone to help you build your life." She covered my hand with hers. "I've watched you fight for yourself this past year. It's time someone fought for you too." The amount was enough to start the small marketing firm I dreamed about. Enough to break free completely. "Harper will be furious," I said, but the thought didn't hurt like it used to. "Harper needs to learn that actions have consequences." Evelyn's voice was firm. "Just like your parents need to learn that enabling isn't the same as loving." My phone buzzed, a text from my mother. "Harper saw your graduation photos online. She's upset you didn't invite us. Please call." I deleted it without responding. "You know what the strangest part is?" I said to Evelyn. "I thought getting revenge on Harper would feel better. Make everything right. But when I finally stood up to her, it wasn't about revenge at all." "What was it about?" "Freedom. From her, from their expectations, from who I thought I had to be." Ethan joined us, sliding into the booth. "Speaking of freedom, I have news." He grinned. "The Chicago firm called. They want both of us, you for marketing, me for development. We can start next month." I felt something settle in my chest, not happiness exactly, but peace. "What do you think, Grandma? Should we go?" "I think," she said carefully, "that you've spent enough time wondering what other people think you should do." She was right. Later that night, I sat at my desk, looking at the last family photo we'd taken before everything fell apart. Harper stood in the center, of course, with our parents flanking her protectively. I was on the edge, already fading from the frame. My phone lit up with a new email from Harper. "I'm sorry for everything, but I miss my big sister. Please come visit, I promise things will be different." For a moment I felt the old pull. The urge to fix things, to be the good sister, to maintain the peace. But as I looked at the inheritance letter, at the Chicago job offer, at my engagement ring catching the light, I realized something important. Sometimes the happiest endings don't involve forgiveness. Sometimes they just involve freedom. I opened my laptop and began typing. "Harper, I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for. I hope you heal, grow, and learn to be happy without needing to control everyone around you. But I won't be there to see it. I'm not your audience anymore. I'm not your victim. I'm not your sister. I'm just free. Sawyer." I hit send, then blocked her email address. On my desk, the family photo stared up at me. I picked it up, considering it one last time, then dropped it in the trash. Tomorrow, Ethan and I would start planning our move to Chicago. Tomorrow, I would begin building my marketing firm with Evelyn's gift. Tomorrow, I would continue becoming the person I was always meant to be. But tonight, I simply sat in the quiet of my freedom and finally completely let go. Some might call it revenge that I got everything Harper tried to take from me. But the truth is, the best revenge wasn't hurting her, it was healing myself. And that's a victory she can never take away.
I've been holding this story inside for years, but recent events have made me realize I need to share it. Maybe it'll help someone else who's going through something similar. It's long, so I'll break it into parts. Growing up, everything in my life revolved around reputation. My parents were both teachers at Riverside Prep, one of those prestigious private schools where politicians and CEOs send their kids. Mom taught AP English, Dad was head of the mathematics department, and their status at the school was everything to them. "Cindy, remember who you are," Mom would say whenever I did anything slightly out of line. "You're a teacher's daughter. People are always watching." I can't count how many times I heard that phrase growing up. It was like a mantra in our house, right up there with "straight A's aren't an achievement, they're an expectation, and your behavior reflects on all of us." I was their only child, their perfect little project. They monitored everything: my grades, my friends, my clothes, even my posture at dinner parties. Looking back, I should have seen the signs of how controlling they were, but when you're raised in that environment, it all seems normal. Things really started looking up in my junior year of high school, when I began dating James Mitchell. His father owned half the real estate in our city's downtown, and his mother was on the school board. My parents were ecstatic. "This is exactly the kind of connection we've been hoping for," Mom told me one night while I was doing homework. "The Mitchells are such a respectable family. And James is so focused on his future." Dad nodded along, adding, "Just think, Cindy. If things work out, you could have such a wonderful life ahead of you." James and I actually got along great at first. He was smart, funny, and seemed to understand the pressure of having parents with high expectations. We'd spend hours talking about our plans for the future. He wanted to go into commercial real estate like his father, and I was planning to become a financial analyst. "We could be such a power couple," he'd say, half joking, but not really. The real estate mogul and his brilliant financial advisor wife. Our parents loved to get together for dinner, planning our futures while we sat there, nodding and smiling. Everything was perfect on the surface. Just like they wanted it. I graduated as valedictorian, got accepted into Winston College's prestigious business program, and started my freshman year with James at the same school. Our parents couldn't have been prouder. They'd achieved their goal. Their daughter was on track for the perfect life they'd planned. College life started out exactly as planned. James and I both threw ourselves into our studies at Winston, and everything felt like it was falling perfectly into place. My business analytics professors praised my work, and I was maintaining that perfect GPA my parents expected. James and I spent most of our free time together, and our relationship grew more serious. By the middle of sophomore year, we'd become intimate. It felt like a natural progression. We'd been dating for almost 3 years at that point, and we talked about marriage after graduation like it was a foregone conclusion. I was 19, in love, and thought I had it all figured out. Then came the morning sickness. At first, I tried to convince myself it was just stress or a stomach bug. But after 2 weeks of running to the bathroom between classes, I couldn't deny it anymore. I bought 3 different pregnancy tests from a pharmacy across town, not wanting to risk running into anyone I knew. I still remember sitting on my dorm room floor, staring at those little pink lines. Positive. All 3 of them. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely text James to come over. "You're what?" His face went pale when I told him. No. This can't be happening. Not now." "I know it's not ideal timing," I said, trying to stay calm. "But we can figure this out together. We've always talked about having a family eventually." "Eventually?" James cut me off. "Yeah, after college, after I've taken over Dad's business, after we're married and established." "Not now." "Do you know what this would do to my future?" I felt like I'd been slapped. "What about our future?" "There's only one solution here," he said, pacing my small dorm room. "You need to get an abortion. We can't have a baby now. It would ruin everything." "No," I said firmly. "I won't do that. This is our child." "My parents will cut me off if they find out about this," he interrupted. "Everything I've worked for will be gone. You can't do this to me, Cindy." But someone had already done it to me. While James and I were arguing, my phone started buzzing. My mom's name flashed on the screen. "Come home, now." Her voice was ice cold. "We need to discuss this situation." I felt sick. "How did you?" "James called his parents. They called us. Come home immediately or we'll come get you ourselves." The drive home was the longest 2 hours of my life. When I walked through my parents' front door, I found both sets of parents waiting for me. The look of disgust on their faces made me want to disappear. "How dare you?" My mother's voice shook with rage. "How dare you disgrace us like this?" "You stupid, stupid girl," my father spat out. "Do you have any idea what this will do to our reputation at school?" Mrs. Mitchell was crying dramatically. "Our James has such a bright future ahead of him. He can't be tied down with a baby now." "I'll raise the baby myself," I said, wrapping my arms protectively around my stomach. "I don't expect anything from James or any of you." "A single mother?" My mother laughed bitterly. "Our daughter, a single mother? Is that what we raised? A little whore who spreads her legs and ruins her life?" "We won't allow it," my father declared. "We will not have our reputation destroyed by your irresponsible behavior." "Reputation?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "This is your grandchild we're talking about." "No," Mrs. Mitchell said firmly. "This is a mistake that needs to be corrected. James has his whole life ahead of him. This thing would ruin everything." The discussion went on for hours. It wasn't really a discussion though, it was more like a coordinated attack. "Think about your future, Cindy," my father kept saying. "How do you plan to support a child? Where will you live? We won't continue paying for your education if you insist on keeping it," my mother added. "Is that what you want? To throw away your entire future?" I sat there on our living room couch, the same couch where I'd spent countless hours studying for tests and planning my perfect future. I could get a job, take a break from school. "And live where?" My mother's voice was sharp. "Certainly not here. We won't have you bringing that kind of shame into our home." "Maybe one of my aunts," I started, but my voice trailed off. Dad was an only child, and Mom's sisters both lived overseas. I had nowhere to go. James sat silently through most of it, staring at the floor. His parents did all the talking for him. "James has an internship lined up with Morgan and Reed Investments next summer," his father kept saying. "Do you want to ruin that for him? Is that how little you care about his future?" They wore me down, bit by bit. Every plan I suggested was shot down. Every possibility I brought up was crushed. No job would pay enough. No apartment would be affordable. No future would be possible. Finally, my mother drove me to the clinic herself. The doctor was professional, but concerned during the initial exam. "I need to inform you," she said quietly, looking directly at me, "that this procedure could impact your ability to conceive in the future. There are potential risks." "We've discussed all that," my mother interrupted. "We've made our decision." The doctor looked at me. "Ms. Thompson, I need to hear from you. Do you understand the risks?" I couldn't speak. I just nodded. The next few weeks passed in a blur. I recovered physically, returned to Winston for the spring semester, and threw myself into my studies. James tried to talk to me once, mumbling something about how it was for the best, but I walked away mid-sentence. We never spoke again. During spring break, instead of going home, I got a job as a barista at a coffee shop near campus. I picked up shifts during every holiday after that. My parents didn't object, they seemed relieved not to have me around. As long as I maintained my GPA and didn't cause any more problems, they were content to keep paying my tuition. "We're glad you finally came to your senses," my mother said during one of our brief phone calls. Everything worked out for the best. But nothing felt like the best. Nothing felt right anymore. I went through the motions, got my assignments done, kept my perfect grades. But something inside me had broken, and I knew it would never be the same. After graduation, I landed a position as a financial analyst at Morgan and Reed Investments. Ironic, considering it was one of the firms James had been so desperate to intern with. But I'd earned my spot on my own merit, graduating summa cum laude and impressing during my interviews. Life settled into a comfortable routine. I buried myself in work, analyzing market trends and building financial models. My apartment became my sanctuary, no judgment, no expectations beyond my own. Then came the night of the company's annual holiday gala. I almost didn't go, but my team leader insisted. "You can't keep hiding behind those spreadsheets forever, Cindy," she said. That's where I met David. He was one of the firm's partners, but not the stuffy, arrogant type I'd expected. He was discussing basketball with the custodial staff when I first saw him, genuinely interested in their March Madness predictions. "I hope I'm not interrupting a serious strategic meeting," I joked, needing to get his signature on some reports. He looked up with the warmest smile I'd ever seen. "Actually, Jose here was just explaining why my bracket is going to be a complete disaster this year." We started dating a month later. David was different from anyone I'd ever known, genuine, kind, and completely unconcerned with status or appearances. When he proposed a year later, it was over takeout Chinese food in my tiny apartment. "I don't need a big wedding," I told him. "Just us." And that's what we did. A simple ceremony at the courthouse, with his sister and best friend as witnesses. No elaborate dresses, no society photographers, no concerned whispers about reputation. Just love and honesty. I didn't tell my parents. By then, we were down to exchanging brief birthday and Christmas texts. They didn't ask about my life, and I didn't volunteer information. Then, 3 years into our marriage, my mother called. "Your father's sick," she said without preamble. "He needs surgery. You should come." David squeezed my hand as we pulled up to my childhood home. It looked exactly the same, perfectly manicured lawn, pristine white trim, not a single thing out of place. My mother's eyes widened when she saw David step out of the car. "Who's this?" "My husband," I said simply. "We've been married for 3 years. What followed was a fascinating transformation. First came the hurt accusations about being excluded from the wedding. But as soon as David mentioned his position as executive director, and they realized I was now a senior financial analyst, their tone completely changed. "Oh, darling, we've missed you so much," my mother gushed, as if the last several years of silence hadn't happened. "You must come visit more often." Then came the real reason for the call. Dad needed expensive surgery, and their insurance wouldn't cover all of it. Could I help? After all, I was doing so well now. I agreed to help with the medical bills. Maybe it was weakness, maybe it was forgiveness, or maybe I just wanted to prove I'd succeeded despite everything. Dad looked genuinely grateful, and for a moment, I let myself believe that maybe the past could stay in the past. After Dad's recovery, David and I started talking about having a family of our own. We both wanted children, and the timing felt right. But month after month, nothing happened. At first, we tried not to worry. "These things take time," David would say, staying positive. But after a year of disappointment, we decided to see a fertility specialist. Dr. Martinez was kind but thorough. She ran various tests and took a detailed medical history. Then came the question I'd been dreading. "Have you ever had any pregnancies or terminations?" My throat went dry. David didn't know about what had happened in college. I'd never found the right time to tell him. But sitting there in that sterile office, the truth had to come out. "Yes," I whispered. "An abortion. When I was 19. Dr. Martinez nodded professionally, making notes. After reviewing all the test results, she delivered the news that shattered my world. "The termination procedure you had resulted in some complications," she explained gently. "Combined with the scarring that developed afterward, I'm afraid your chances of conceiving are virtually non-existent." I felt the room spin. All those years ago, the doctor at the clinic had warned about risks, but my mother had dismissed them. Now here I was, paying the price for a choice that had never really been mine. That evening, I had to tell David everything. We sat on our back porch, the same spot where we usually planned our future, and I confessed it all: the pregnancy in college, my parents' reaction, the coerced abortion. "I'm so sorry," I sobbed. "I should have told you sooner." I understand if this changes things. David pulled me into his arms, cutting off my words. Hey, look at me, he said softly. Nothing could change how I feel about you. Nothing. We sat in silence for a while, his arms around me, before he spoke again. You know, there are other ways to build a family. We could look into adoption. Give a home to a child who needs one. His words were like a lifeline. We spent that night researching adoption agencies and requirements, making plans for a different kind of future than we'd imagined, but one filled with just as much love. Meanwhile, my newly rekindled relationship with my parents took on an uncomfortable pattern. Every visit included the same question: so, when are you going to give us grandchildren? I'd deflect, change the subject, talk about work or Dad's recovery, anything to avoid the truth. They'd already proven they cared more about appearances than their own grandchild once before. I wasn't about to give them another chance to judge my choices. Even though Dad had fully recovered, I kept sending them money every month. Maybe it was habit, maybe it was guilt, or maybe some part of me still hoped that financial success would finally earn their genuine approval. The Thanksgiving invitation came as a surprise. My parents rarely hosted holidays anymore, claiming they were too exhausting. But this year, my mother insisted we come. We're having a few friends over, she said. Nothing fancy, just some colleagues from school and their families. I should have known better. When we arrived, the house was packed with at least 30 people, all pillars of the local education community, all part of my parents' carefully curated social circle. The evening started predictably enough. Everyone commented on how successful I'd become, how impressive David's position was, how proud my parents must be. The same shallow conversations I'd grown up with. Then came the moment that changed everything. My mother cornered us by the dessert table, wine glass in hand, speaking just loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. You know, Cindy, Mrs. Peterson was just showing me pictures of her new grandson. Absolutely adorable. When are you and David going to give us grandchildren? Everyone else our age is already enjoying grandparenthood. Before I could deflect, David squeezed my hand and answered honestly. Actually, we're looking into adoption. We've already started the application process. The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's face went through several shades of red before she practically shouted, "Adoption? Have you lost your mind?" Heads turned. Conversation stopped. My mother seized the audience's attention like the experienced teacher she was. Everyone, can you believe this? My daughter, who could give us perfectly good grandchildren of her own, wants to adopt instead. Mom, please, I hissed. This isn't the time or place. Dad stormed over from his position by the fireplace. What's this nonsense about adoption? Are you trying to embarrass us again? Do you have any idea what kind of background these children come from? Drug addicts, criminals, mentally ill parents, is that what you want to bring into this family? You're making a scene, I said firmly. This is a private matter. But the damage was done. My parents' friends, loosened by holiday drinks and encouraged by my parents' reaction, started chiming in. You really should have your own children, dear, Mrs. Peterson offered. You never know what you're getting with adopted kids. My cousin's friend adopted, another guest added. Terrible mistake. The child had all sorts of problems. Think about your family legacy, someone else called out. My parents stood there nodding along, clearly pleased that their social circle was backing them up. The same smug expressions they'd worn all those years ago, when they'd had others gang up on me about my pregnancy. Something inside me snapped. You want to know why we're adopting? My voice cut through the murmur of judgmental whispers. You really want to know? Fine, I'll tell you all exactly why. The room went deadly quiet. I could see the warning in my mother's eyes, but I was done protecting their reputation. I can't have children because of complications from an abortion I had when I was 19. An abortion that you, both of you, forced me to have because you were more concerned about what the neighbors would think than about your own daughter and grandchild. Someone gasped. Mrs. Peterson's wine glass froze halfway to her mouth. You threatened to kick me out, cut off my education, leave me with nothing unless I took care of the problem, I continued, my voice shaking but clear. The doctor warned there could be complications, but Mom, you remember what you said? We've made our decision. Not me. We. You and Dad and the Mitchells, all deciding what would happen to my body, my baby, my future. I turned to address the shocked faces around the room. So yes, we're adopting. Because thanks to my parents' desperate need to maintain their precious reputation, that's my only option for having a family now. The silence that followed was deafening. Then my mother did something I should have expected but still caught me off guard. She went on the attack. How dare you, she shrieked. How dare you come into my home and tell such vicious lies? You ungrateful girl. She turned to her guests, hands trembling. She's lying. She's always been troubled, always trying to blame others for her mistakes. She got herself into trouble and had an abortion without even telling us until after the fact. We would never. Are you serious? I cut her off. You're really going to stand there and lie? In front of all these people? David, show them the medical records. My husband pulled out his phone where we'd saved copies of my old medical files, documentation I'd gotten from the clinic for our fertility specialist. But before he could pull them up, my mother completely lost it. Get out, she screamed. Get out of my house right now. You've ruined everything, again. Just like you always do. Get out. As David and I walked to the car, I could hear my mother trying to do damage control inside, her voice high and panicked as she offered more drinks to her guests. My father didn't say a word, he just stood there, silent as always when it really mattered. The drive home was quiet. David held my hand the entire way, not pushing me to talk, just being there. When we finally got home, I went straight to my laptop and canceled the automatic monthly transfer to my parents' account. It took exactly 2 months for my mother to call. I was in the middle of reviewing our home study paperwork for the adoption agency when her name appeared on my phone screen. I almost didn't answer. But part of me wanted to hear what she could possibly have to say after Thanksgiving. The Petersons withdrew their son from the school, she began without even a hello. Mrs. Chen isn't inviting me to her book club anymore. Do you have any idea what you've done to our reputation? I actually laughed. After everything, she was still only concerned about reputation. Your father and I deserve compensation for this damage you've caused, she continued. The monthly support you were providing barely covers the social costs we're incurring. People are treating us differently at work. We've had to explain things, to make excuses. Excuses? I cut in. You mean lies. Like the lies you told at Thanksgiving? Or the lies you've been telling yourselves all these years about what you did to me? We did what was best for you. And this is how you repay us? By spreading vicious stories and then cutting us off financially? What was best for me? My voice was steady now, calmer than I'd ever been when speaking to her. Do you know what David and I did last week? We met with a therapist who specializes in helping adoptive parents deal with infertility grief. She helped me understand something important. What you did wasn't just about the abortion. It was about control. It's always been about control. Don't you dare. The money was just another form of control, I continued. As long as I was paying you, you felt like you still had power over me. Well, that's done now. I'm done. You ungrateful little. I'm blocking your number after this call, I said. Both of yours. David and I are in the final stages of our adoption home study. In a few months, we'll hopefully be matched with a child who needs a home. A child who will never have to worry about family reputation being more important than their well-being. A child who will be loved unconditionally. You're making a huge mistake, she hissed. When you realize that, don't come crawling back. I ended the call mid-sentence and blocked both their numbers immediately. Then I went back to my adoption paperwork with a lighter heart than I'd had in years. That was 6 months ago. Today, David and I are finishing up the nursery for the baby girl we'll be welcoming next month. Her birth mother chose us specifically because of our story. She wanted her daughter to be raised by parents who understood that love is more important than appearances. Sometimes I think about my parents, about what they're missing out on. But then I remember, they made their choice a long time ago. They chose reputation over love, appearances over family. I'm choosing differently. My daughter will grow up knowing she is wanted, cherished, and accepted exactly as she is. No conditions. No expectations. No concern for what the neighbors might think. Final edit, our daughter is home with us now. She's perfect. I'm Amalia, and from my earliest memories, responsibility was my constant companion. Our modest home was always bustling with activity, my 2 younger brothers running around, and later, my baby sister who came into our lives when I was 10. "Amalia, honey, could you help change Sarah's diaper?" Mom would call out, her voice tired from working double shifts. I'd drop whatever I was doing and rush to help. That was our normal, everyone pitched in, except Sarah. From the moment she arrived, she was different. "She's just a baby, let her be," Dad would say, waving off any concerns about her behavior. I watched as my parents worked themselves to exhaustion, trying to provide for us all. Dad at the construction site, Mom cleaning houses, they did everything they could to keep food on our table and dreams alive in our hearts. My brothers, Mike and David, were the middle children, often lost in the shuffle between my responsibilities and Sarah's privileges. We shared knowing looks across the dinner table when Sarah would throw another tantrum and get her way. Again. I started working right after high school, determined to break free from the cycle of just getting by. The local diner wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. Every penny I earned went into my college fund jar, hidden away in my closet. I'd count it late at night, dreaming of the day I'd have enough to start classes at the community college. Within a year, my managers noticed my dedication. I went from waitressing to handling the books, and suddenly, my college dreams didn't seem so far-fetched anymore. I enrolled in evening classes, juggling work and studies with a determination that surprised even me. The exhaustion was real. Some nights I'd fall asleep over my textbooks, only to wake up at dawn for another shift. But watching Sarah sleep until noon, skip school whenever she felt like it, and face no consequences only fueled my drive to succeed. "You're going to burn yourself out," Dad warned one evening, finding me studying in the kitchen at midnight. I looked up from my accounting homework and smiled. "Maybe, but I'm going somewhere, Dad. I promise you that." My college degree opened doors I never thought possible. First National Bank hired me as a junior analyst, and I threw myself into the work with the same determination that got me through school. Within months, my supervisor pulled me aside. "Amalia, I've never seen someone pick things up so quickly," she said. "Keep this up, and you'll go far here." She wasn't wrong. I had a knack for numbers and an even better one for dealing with people. While others complained about office politics, I navigated them effortlessly. Maybe all those years of managing family dynamics had taught me something useful after all. Meanwhile, my brothers Mike and David had moved out, starting their own lives. But Sarah? She was still at home, living the same consequence-free life she always had. Mom would call me with updates I didn't want to hear. "Sarah was out until 3 a.m. again," she'd say, sighing. "I worry, but you know how she is." I did know. I also knew about the parade of boyfriends, the failing grades, and the general lack of direction. But it wasn't my problem anymore. I had my own life now, my own apartment, my own goals. Then came the call that changed everything. "Sarah's pregnant," Mom announced one morning. "The father's gone to Arizona. Says he wants nothing to do with it." I gripped my phone tighter. And we'll help her raise the baby, of course. What else can we do?" Of course they would. Sarah was still their precious baby, even at 18, even pregnant with her own child. I stayed silent, already knowing what was coming next. You'll help too, won't you, Amalia? Come over on weekends? You're so good with children. That's when I started developing an impressive array of excuses. Urgent work projects. Professional development courses. Client meetings. Anything to avoid spending my precious free time taking care of yet another child. I don't understand you anymore, Mom said during one particularly tense phone call. You used to be so helpful. I used to be a child forced to be helpful, I corrected her. I'm an adult now, with my own life. But family works both ways, Mom. Or have you forgotten the money I send every month? That usually shut them up, at least temporarily. The checks I wrote were substantial, enough to cover Sarah's prenatal care, then baby supplies, then ongoing expenses. But it was never enough to buy their approval. My Aunt Lisa told me over coffee one day, they're calling you heartless behind your back, you know. Saying you've changed, become cold. I stirred my coffee slowly, watching the cream create patterns in the dark liquid. Let them talk. They've never understood me anyway. They say you're ungrateful, she pressed on. I looked her straight in the eye. Ungrateful for what? The privilege of raising their other children? The opportunity to now raise their grandchild? I've earned everything I have, Aunt Lisa. Everything. The promotion to senior analyst came through that week. My salary increased again, and so did the checks I sent home. But I kept my boundaries firm. No weekends babysitting. No emergency childcare. No last-minute favors. Let them call me callous. I'd spent enough of my life being the responsible one. Between client meetings and financial reports, romance wasn't exactly a priority. My dating app sat mostly unused on my phone until that rainy Tuesday night when James's message popped up. Something about his profile seemed different, maybe it was the genuine smile, or the lack of shirtless gym selfies. I notice you work in finance, his message read. I'm actually an investment advisor. Maybe we could bore each other with market talk over coffee? That coffee turned into dinner, which turned into weekends, which turned into 2 years of the kind of relationship I'd never thought I'd have time for. James was patient, understanding about my work schedule, and somehow managed to make me laugh even after my most stressful days. You know, he said one evening as we walked through the park, I never thought I'd find someone who understands both compound interest and my terrible jokes. Then came the proposal, nothing flashy, just us in my apartment after a home-cooked meal. I can't imagine my life without you, he said, holding out the ring. Marry me? I said yes, before he could even finish asking. Introducing him to my family was surprisingly smooth. Even Sarah behaved herself, which was a minor miracle. My parents were overjoyed, finally, their workaholic daughter was settling down. He's wonderful, Amalia, Mom gushed after our first family dinner together. And did you see how great he is with Tommy? She meant Sarah's son, my nephew, who had indeed taken an instant liking to James. The wedding was beautiful, and married life started out perfectly. James fit into the family like he'd always been there. He'd play with Tommy for hours when we visited, teaching him to throw a ball or build with blocks. Sarah watched these interactions with an odd intensity one didn't quite register at the time. He's going to be such an amazing father, she'd say, smiling at me meaningfully. You're so lucky, Amalia. That's when the questions started. First from my family, then from James himself. Don't you think it's time? He'd ask, watching Tommy run around our living room. We're not getting any younger. I'd explain my position again and again. I want us to be completely ready. We need our own house first, not this apartment. We need savings, security. But we're doing well, he'd counter. Both have good jobs, what are we waiting for? For the right time, I'd insist. One child, when we're ready. That's the plan we agreed on. He'd sigh and drop it, but I could feel his disappointment. During family gatherings, I'd catch him looking wistfully at Tommy. Your sister manages just fine, he'd say sometimes, not quite keeping the edge out of his voice. My sister lives with our parents and relies on their retirement savings, I'd reply. That's not what I want for our child. The tension grew slowly, almost imperceptibly. Like watching storm clouds gather on a sunny day, you know the rain is coming, but you tell yourself it's still far away. I was too focused on my next promotion, our house savings fund, the 5-year plan I'd carefully crafted. 5 years of marriage, and spring cleaning still meant going through James's mess. He never could keep his side of the closet organized. That Saturday morning started like any other, me sorting through old receipts, forgotten gym clothes, and the usual clutter that accumulated on his shelves. That's when I found it. A phone I'd never seen before, tucked behind his winter sweaters. My stomach tightened as I picked it up. Not his work phone. Not his personal phone. It wasn't even locked. My hands shook as I opened the messages. The first one I saw was from Sarah. My baby sister. Miss you already. Can't wait until Saturday when she's at work again. Hundreds of messages. Pictures I wish I could unsee. Conversations about me. LOL, she's so clueless, always at the office. All she cares about is her precious career. The timestamps went back months. My legs gave out, and I sat there on the closet floor, reading message after message, each one worse than the last. Then I saw it, the message that made my world stop spinning. Baby's definitely yours. Doctor confirmed today. 12 weeks along. I don't remember driving to my parents' house. I don't remember much except the phone clutched in my white-knuckled grip. Sarah was there, of course. Saturday morning cartoons with Tommy. One big happy family. What the hell is this? I threw the phone on the coffee table. Tommy looked up, startled, and Mom quickly sent him to play in his room. Sarah didn't even flinch. She picked up the phone, scrolled through it casually like she was checking the weather. Oh, well, I guess you know now. That's all you have to say? You're sleeping with my husband? She shrugged, actually shrugged. We're in love, Amalia. These things happen. And now with the baby coming, James and I want to get married. Once Amalia stops being difficult about it. Difficult? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I'm being difficult? Well, yes, Sarah said, like she was explaining something simple to a child. You never wanted children anyway. You're too busy with your precious career. James needs a real family. I turned to my parents, waiting for them to say something, anything, to defend me. To condemn this betrayal. Instead, Mom sat down next to Sarah, patting her hand. Amalia, try to be reasonable. Tommy needs a father figure, and James is so good with him. And now with another baby coming. Reasonable? My voice cracked. My husband and sister are having an affair, and you want me to be reasonable? Dad cleared his throat. Well, you never wanted children, honey. And James, he's always wanted to be a father. Maybe this is for the best. When was the last time you even cooked him dinner? Sarah would make a proper wife. I looked at them, my family, all sitting there, defending the indefensible. Sarah, smug and pregnant with my husband's child. Mom, already planning the next wedding. Dad, avoiding my eyes, but clearly on their side. A proper wife, I repeated numbly. Like your precious Sarah, who mooches off you and cheats with her sister's husband. Sarah rolled her eyes. Don't be dramatic, Amalia. Just go back to your big office and your important meetings. Leave the family stuff to people who actually care about it. I barely remember the drive home from my parents' house. The world seemed unreal, like I was watching someone else's life fall apart instead of my own. When I walked through our front door, James was there in the living room, acting like it was just another normal Saturday. Hey, honey, he moved to hug me, that familiar smile on his face. The smile I used to love. The smile that now made me sick to my stomach. I stepped back, holding up his second phone. Want to explain this? The change in his face was instant, first confusion, then recognition, then fear. Where did you? Found it while cleaning. You really should find better hiding spots for your affair phones. Amalia, I can explain. Explain what? The messages? The photos? Or maybe explain how you got my sister pregnant? He tried denial first, like they all do. It's not, I didn't, but he must have seen something in my face, because suddenly his whole demeanor changed. The mask dropped completely. Fine. Yes, Sarah and I are together, he snapped. What did you expect? You're never home. All you care about is work, work, work. When was the last time we even had a real conversation about starting a family? Oh, so this is my fault? You cheated because I wanted financial security before having children? You never wanted children. Not really. You always had some excuse, the house, the savings, the right time. Sarah actually wants a family. She understands what's important in life. I looked at this man, this stranger wearing my husband's face, and felt nothing but disgust. What's important in life is loyalty. Honor. Basic human decency. But I guess those things aren't important to you or my precious sister. Don't act all high and mighty, he snarled. You're just angry because Sarah's giving me what you wouldn't. The divorce papers were filed the next day. I had documentation of the affair, so it went through quickly. My brothers, Mike and David, came to help me move out of the apartment. They were the only ones who stood by me. We always knew Sarah was spoiled, Mike said as we packed boxes, but this is a new low. David couldn't even say her name. They're dead to me, he declared. Both of them. Through my brothers, I heard the updates I never wanted but couldn't help knowing. James and Sarah got married in a small ceremony. My parents were there, of course, beaming proudly. The baby was born, a girl. They moved into a small house in the suburbs. Tommy started calling James Dad. Mom keeps trying to get us to visit them, Mike told me during one of our monthly dinners. Says we need to be a family again. We are a family, David said, raising his glass. The three of us. That's enough. I nodded, grateful for my brother's loyalty in a world where loyalty seemed to mean nothing anymore. We were the only ones who understood that some betrayals can't be forgiven, some bridges can't be rebuilt, and some families are better off broken. 4 years can change everything. My new apartment overlooked the city skyline, floor-to-ceiling windows, marble countertops, and enough space to finally display the art collection I'd always wanted. The Mercedes in my reserved parking spot gleamed under the garage lights. I'd made it, exactly as I'd planned. My brothers visited often, bringing news and rumors. Sarah and James struggling to make ends meet. 3 moves in 2 years, each apartment smaller than the last. But I didn't care. Their life wasn't my concern anymore. Until that Tuesday evening when my phone lit up with a number I'd hoped never to see again. Amalia? James's voice. 4 years older, but still familiar enough to make my stomach clench. Please don't hang up. I should have. Instead, I listened. We need your help, he said, as if he had any right to ask me for anything. Sarah's had an accident. Broke her leg badly, compound fracture. She's had surgery, but she can't move around, can't take care of the kids. And, she's pregnant again. I sat there, phone pressed to my ear, wondering if this was some kind of cosmic joke. The kids need someone to pick them up from school, watch them until I get home from work. Tommy's getting too big to handle everything himself, and with the new baby coming. He paused. We thought maybe you could help. You thought what? My voice came out eerily calm. They're your nephews, Amalia. Your family. Sarah can't even get to the bathroom by herself right now. My family? I repeated. The sister who slept with my husband and the husband who cheated on me, that's my family? Don't be like that, he snapped, his tone shifting from pleading to accusatory. This isn't about us. It's about innocent children who need help. Or are you too selfish to care about them too? Selfish? I almost laughed. That's rich, coming from you. We're struggling here. His voice rose. Do you know how expensive kids are? I'm working overtime just to keep food on the table. We can't even afford a decent apartment anymore. Meanwhile, you're living it up in your luxury condo with your fancy car. So that's what this is about? Money? Not all of us can focus only on our careers, he said bitterly. Some of us have real responsibilities. Must be nice, having all that money and no one to spend it on but yourself. Must be nice having the family you stole and no way to support them, I replied coldly. Sounds like a real dream come true. The kids need parents who didn't build their relationship on betrayal. Goodbye, James. I hung up mid-protest and blocked his number before he could call back. My mother's number showing up on my phone was almost as unwelcome as James's had been. I answered anyway, some old habit I couldn't quite break. Amalia? Mom's voice had that tone, the one she always used when she wanted something. We need to talk about Sarah. She needs help. James called you, didn't he? About her leg? I paced my living room, fighting the urge to hang up immediately. Yes, he did. And I'll tell you what I told him, not my problem. How can you be so cold? She's your sister. She's struggling with 3 children, well, soon to be 3. The sister who slept with my husband? That sister? Mom sighed heavily. That was years ago, Amalia. You need to move past it. We're family. Funny how family only matters when you need something from me. We've helped her as much as we can, Mom's voice cracked a little. But she keeps asking for money, for the kids, for the rent, for everything. We've gone through all our savings. Your father and we can't keep this up. I couldn't help but laugh. So the golden child is finally becoming too expensive to maintain? Don't be cruel. She's never learned to. Mom trailed off. To what? Work? Support herself? Take responsibility for her actions? Gee, I wonder why that is. She just keeps having babies, Mom said, frustration finally breaking through. She won't look for a job, says she's too busy with the children. But she's always asking for money, always needing something. Sounds like exactly the person you raised her to be, I said coldly. The princess who never had to face consequences. You have no right to speak to me like that. Mom's voice rose. I am your mother. And whose fault is it that Sarah turned out this way? Who taught her that she never had to work for anything? That someone would always bail her out? We did our best. No, you did your easiest. And now you're calling me because the monster you created is too expensive to feed. You have a duty to help your family. Mom was almost shouting now. After everything we've done for you. Everything you've done for me? I cut in. You mean like supporting my sister when she had an affair with my husband? Or like calling me selfish for wanting financial security before having children? I don't owe you anything. I hung up before she could respond, my hands shaking with 4 years of pent-up rage. The expensive view from my apartment windows suddenly seemed like the best revenge, my life, built exactly as I'd planned it, without their help or their approval. Mike called me one evening while I was reviewing quarterly reports. You'll never guess who tried calling me today. Sarah, I already knew. The desperation tour was making its rounds. Bingo. Wanted me to help with the kids, maybe loan them some money until they get back on their feet. He snorted. As if they were ever on their feet to begin with. What did you tell her? Same thing David told her yesterday, that some betrayals can't be undone. That what she did to you wasn't just cheating, it was destroying a family. She started crying, saying we were being cruel, that family should help family. He paused. I reminded her she didn't seem too concerned about family when she was sleeping with your husband. I leaned back in my office chair, looking out at the city lights. How did she take that? About as well as you'd expect. Started screaming about how we're all against her, How nobody understands how hard her life is. He chuckled darkly. Guess karma finally caught up with her. 2 weeks later, David brought the news I'd been expecting. They moved in with Mom and Dad. All of them, Sarah, James, the kids, and the baby on the way. Dad's converting his workshop into another bedroom. How are Mom and Dad handling it? Remember how peaceful retirement was supposed to be? Well, now they're full-time babysitters and ATMs. Mom's watching the kids while Sarah recovers, which apparently means scrolling through her phone all day. Dad's dipping into his pension to cover their expenses. I shook my head. They made their choice. Mom came by my place yesterday, David continued. Wanted to know if I'd talk to you about helping out. Said they're overwhelmed. I bet they are. The next day, Mom showed up at my door unannounced. I almost didn't recognize her. She looked older, tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. Please, she started before I could even speak. Just listen. No, I cut her off. You listen. You chose all of it. You chose to spoil Sarah rotten. You chose to support her when she betrayed me. You chose to let them move in. These are your choices, Mom. Live with them. And if you show up at my door again, I'm calling the police. Are we clear? She started to speak, but I cut her off again. The next time you feel overwhelmed, remember this was your choice. You chose the daughter who betrayed her sister over the one who only ever worked hard and did the right thing. Now live with it. I closed the door on her protests and blocked her number, the last family number I had left to block, besides my brother's. That night, I had dinner with Marcus, the man I'd been seeing for the past few months. He knew my story, knew about the betrayal and the aftermath. He'd never pushed, never rushed, just listened and understood. After I told him about the latest family events, he reached across the table and took my hand. Family isn't always who you're born to. Sometimes it's who you choose. I squeezed his hand back, thinking about my brothers who stood by me, about Marcus who understood me, about the life I'd built on my own terms. In the end, Sarah hadn't stolen my family, she'd just helped me see which parts of it were worth keeping. My brothers are coming over this weekend, I told him. Would you like to join us? His smile was answer enough. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly at peace with where I was and who I had chosen to be. The drama playing out at my parents' house wasn't my problem anymore. I had my own life to live, my own family to build, and my own happiness to protect. My name is Abigail Stewart, and I was born with a silver spoon in my mouth, as they say. Not that I realized it at first. When you grow up wealthy, you think everyone lives like you do. Our family owned the largest chain of pharmacies in the state, Stewart Pharmaceuticals. It wasn't just a business, it was my grandfather's legacy. He built it from nothing, and my father David inherited it when I was just a kid. The business became my father's whole identity. He'd walk into our massive Victorian house after work, loosen his expensive tie, and start talking about profit margins, before even saying hello. Another record quarter, he'd announce at dinner, while my mother Margaret nodded approvingly, adjusting her pearl necklace. This is what I'm going to pass down to my children someday. My older brother James would just push his food around the plate during these conversations. Even at 12, while I was still playing with dolls, he was more interested in ancient civilizations than profit margins. He'd try to change the subject to his latest archaeological discovery from the backyard, but Dad would just wave it off. I was different, though. Even as a kid, I loved helping out at the pharmacies. By the time I was 14, I knew all our regular customers by name and could recite our inventory like the alphabet. Dad noticed. Now that's my girl, he'd beam when I'd tell him about helping an elderly customer find the right medication or suggesting a new display arrangement that increased sales. She's got business in her blood. The shift happened gradually. As James buried himself deeper in history books and archaeological journals, Dad started bringing me to business meetings. By 16, I was doing inventory counts and helping with basic accounting. "Watch and learn, Abigail," Dad would say, showing me how to review contracts. "This will all be yours someday." My mother was thrilled too. "Finally, someone to carry on the family tradition properly," she'd say, giving me expensive business suits for my birthday while James got cheap history books. I remember the day James announced he was going to study archaeology in college. We were having dinner in our formal dining room, the one with the crystal chandelier that cost more than most cars. "You're what?" Dad exploded, his fork clattering against the fine china. "No son of mine is going to waste his life digging in the dirt." "David, please," Mom tried to calm him down, but her face showed she agreed with him. "It's what I love, Dad," James said quietly but firmly. "I've already been accepted to the program, and Professor Anderson says I have real potential." "Potential to be poor," Dad shouted. "We're business people, not dirt scholars." I watched James's face set in that determined way I knew meant his mind was made up. "Then I guess I'm not a business person," he said, standing up from the table. That was the night everything changed. Dad turned all his attention, and expectations, to me. I was no longer just the backup plan, I was the future of Stewart Pharmaceuticals. The pressure was intense, but I loved it. Or at least, I thought I did. Preston Business College was everything I'd dreamed of, prestigious, competitive, and full of other trust fund kids just like me. I felt right at home with my designer clothes and platinum credit card. That's when I met Zane. It was in the campus library, of all places. I was struggling with a coding assignment when this guy at the next table noticed me cursing under my breath at my laptop. "Need some help?" he asked, sliding into the chair next to me. He had the kindest brown eyes I'd ever seen and a slight accent I couldn't place. That's how it started. Zane was brilliant, he'd gotten a full scholarship to study computer science and was at the top of his class. Everyone knew him, professors would use his projects as examples, other students would fight to have him on their team for group assignments. But he was so humble about it all. It took me 3 coffee study sessions to work up the courage to ask about his background. He told me matter-of-factly about his parents immigrating from Syria when he was little, about his dad working security and his mom cleaning houses. How he'd been coding since he was 12, teaching himself on a second-hand laptop. "I used to do freelance work after school," he said. "Had to help with the bills, you know?" I didn't know, actually. I'd never had to worry about bills in my life. But something about the way he said it, no self-pity, just stating facts, made me admire him even more. We started dating a month later. Zane was different from the rich boys I'd grown up with. He opened doors because he was genuinely polite, not because etiquette class had drilled it into him. When he took me out, it was to small family-owned restaurants where the food was amazing and the owners knew him by name. 6 months in, he proposed. Not with some massive diamond like my dad would have expected, just a simple silver band he'd saved up for, given to me during a sunset walk through campus. It was perfect. Dad was thrilled when I told him I was engaged, at first. He immediately planned this huge family dinner to meet my fiancé, inviting all our relatives. I could practically hear him imagining some heir to a Fortune 500 company. The moment we walked into our massive dining room, I knew I was wrong. I watched my family's faces change, like someone had flipped a switch, from eager smiles to barely concealed sneers. My Aunt Patricia actually clutched her pearls. Mom's champagne glass froze halfway to her mouth. The silence was deafening until Dad cleared his throat. The sound echoed through our massive dining room like a gunshot. I could feel Zane's hand tense in mine under the table. "So, young man," Dad said in that condescending tone he usually reserved for his employees, drawing out each word like he was speaking to a child, "tell us about your background. Where exactly are you from?" Zane sat up straighter, maintaining his dignity despite the hostile atmosphere. I admired how he kept his voice steady and respectful. "My parents immigrated from Syria when I was young, sir. We've been here since I was 6. "And what do your parents do?" Dad pressed, his lip curling slightly. The crystal chandelier above us cast harsh shadows across his face, making him look almost sinister. My father works as a security guard at Atlantic Corp, and my mother works as a cleaner, Zane answered honestly. His voice remained firm and proud. I've worked part-time jobs since I was old enough to help support them. But I was fortunate to earn a full scholarship to Preston. My mother practically choked on her wine and grabbed her water glass, taking desperate gulps. The pearls around her neck trembled with each swallow. Aunt Patricia and Uncle George exchanged meaningful looks, while Cousin Rebecca actually snickered behind her manicured hand. Dad's face was getting redder by the second. The vein in his forehead, the one that only appeared when he was truly angry, began to pulse. Well, he said, pushing his plate away with such force that the expensive china rattled, I hope you understand, young man, that my Abigail is accustomed to a certain lifestyle. She's never wanted for anything. How exactly do you plan to provide for her? Before I could jump in, Zane responded calmly, his composure a stark contrast to my father's growing anger. I'm already successfully trading in cryptocurrency markets, Mr. Stewart. I built a substantial portfolio, and I'm developing plans for my own tech startup. Cryptocurrency? Dad interrupted with a harsh laugh that echoed off the mahogany-paneled walls. You mean like what that scammer sold to Aunt Martha? The one who cleaned out her savings account? His voice dripped with contempt. Dad, that's completely different, I tried to explain, my heart pounding. Zane's actually incredibly knowledgeable about blockchain technology. He's even been asked to speak at tech conferences. Enough. Dad slammed his hand on the table, making the crystal glasses rattle and the silverware jump. The sound made everyone at the table flinch, except Zane. I know a con man when I see one. Your Aunt Martha thought she knew better too, didn't she? Mr. Stewart, Zane attempted to explain, still maintaining his composure even as my father's face grew darker. I understand your concerns, but I assure you. No, you don't understand. Dad stood up, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor with a screech that made my teeth hurt. He towered over the table, his hands planted firmly on the white tablecloth. You're not suitable for my daughter. You're a migrant from a poor family. You don't understand our values, our way of life. You're not one of us. I watched in horror as my father, the man who'd taught me about business ethics and professional conduct, showed his true colors. The worst part was seeing how the rest of my family nodded along, as if he was just saying what they were all thinking. Dad wasn't done. His face twisted with rage as he jabbed his finger in Zane's direction. I see right through you, you know that? You're just another gold digger with a sob story, trying to get your hands on my daughter's inheritance. David, please, Mom interrupted, but not to defend Zane. She turned to me with what she probably thought was a motherly expression. Honey, you're too young for marriage. Finish college first, come work at the company like we planned. There's plenty of time to think about marriage, with someone more suitable. Uncle George cleared his throat. He's probably just after the pharmacy chain, David. These people are clever that way. Remember the Martinez boy who tried dating Rebecca? Aunt Patricia chimed in, talking about Zane as if he wasn't even there. Same thing, all charm until they get what they want. I watched Zane's face as my family continued their verbal assault. He sat perfectly still, his expression composed, but I could see the slight tightening around his eyes, the way his knuckles whitened as he gripped his water glass. What kind of future could you possibly offer her? Dad sneered. Living in some tiny apartment, eating microwave dinners, while you waste time on your imaginary internet money? That was it. Something inside me snapped. I stood up so quickly, my chair fell backward with a crash. Stop it. All of you, just stop. My voice shook with rage. You should be ashamed of yourselves. You're acting like entitled, prejudiced snobs. Abigail, Mom gasped, clutching her pearls. No, Mom, I'm done. I reached for Zane's hand. I've never been more embarrassed to be part of this family than I am right now. Come on, Zane, we're leaving. We walked toward the door, heads held high, while my relatives muttered and whispered behind us. Dad's voice boomed through the foyer as we reached for our coats. "You walk out that door with him, Abigail, and you'll regret it. Do you hear me? After everything we've invested in you? All the money we spent on your education, your future? You owe us." I turned back one last time, meeting his furious gaze. "The only thing I owe you is the courtesy of walking out instead of telling you exactly what I think of you right now." I heard him shouting about debts and obligations as we walked to Zane's car, but I didn't look back. Some debts, I was learning, weren't worth paying. A year flew by like a dream. Zane and I finished college, him with highest honors in computer science, me with my business degree. We'd moved into a modest apartment, and despite my family's dire predictions, we were happy. So when Zane suggested we stop waiting and get married that summer, I didn't hesitate. I spent hours crafting the perfect wedding announcement for social media. I posted a beautiful engagement photo of us, with a heartfelt message about love transcending boundaries. The responses started rolling in almost immediately. "Not congratulations, attacks. Cousin Rebecca, I can't believe you're still with that fortune hunter. Count me out. Aunt Patricia, your poor parents must be so disappointed. We raised you better than this. Uncle George, no self-respecting steward would attend this travesty." My phone kept buzzing with notifications, each one more cruel than the last. I finally had to turn it off when my mother's comment appeared, "You're making the biggest mistake of your life. Don't expect us there." I cried for hours that night, while Zane held me and whispered that we could postpone, that maybe they just needed more time. But I was done waiting for my family to change. "No," I said, wiping my eyes. "We're getting married. With or without them." I didn't expect James to come. My brother was in the middle of an important dig in Egypt, something about a previously undiscovered tomb. But 2 days before the wedding, he showed up at our apartment door, covered in desert dust and grinning. "You think I'd miss my little sister's wedding?" he said, pulling me into a bear hug. "Besides, someone's got to walk you down the aisle." The wedding was small but beautiful. We held it in a garden, with fairy lights twinkling in the trees. Zane's family filled one side of the aisle, warm, welcoming people who had embraced me as their own from day one. My side was painfully empty, save for James and a couple of distant cousins who had dared to defy the family boycott. A year passed. Zane's tech career was taking off, and I'd started my own small business consultancy. We were building our life together, brick by brick, without any help from the Stewart fortune. Then the invitation came. "Your presence is requested at the 60th birthday celebration of David Stewart." My hand shook as I read it. After all this time, were they finally ready to make peace? I showed it to Zane, who squeezed my hand. "It's your call, love," he said softly. "But whatever you decide, we face it together." The night of the party, we dressed our best. I spent hours picking out the perfect gift, a rare first edition of my father's favorite business book, something that showed I still remembered, still cared. We walked into that familiar house, my heart pounding with nervous anticipation. The room fell silent when we entered, just like that first dinner, but I pushed ahead. With trembling hands, I presented the carefully wrapped package to my father. He didn't even look at it. Just picked it up and tossed it aside like it was garbage, the beautiful paper crinkling as it landed among the other gifts. The dinner started like a perfectly choreographed show of cruelty. Every question, every comment was designed to wound. I watched in horror as my family took turns trying to break my husband's spirit. "So," Uncle George drawled, swirling his expensive wine, "still playing with your internet money, or have you found a real job yet?" Before Zane could answer, Aunt Patricia chimed in. "Dear, do you know which fork to use for the salad?" She giggled, nudging my cousin Rebecca. "These fancy dinners must be quite different from what you're used to." "That's quite a simple suit you're wearing," my mother observed with a smirk. "I suppose designer labels aren't in your budget?" "I wonder," cousin Rebecca piped up, "have you ever even eaten truffle before tonight? They're quite expensive, you know." I watched Zane's face remain perfectly composed, even as they treated him like some sort of circus attraction. He'd built a successful life from nothing, earned every bit of respect he had in the tech world, and here they were, acting like he was beneath them because he didn't inherit his success. The breaking point came when my father raised his glass. "You know," he announced to the table, loud enough to silence everyone, "I always wondered what would happen to my daughter if she married beneath her station. Tell me, boy, does she miss her credit cards? Her shopping sprees? Or have you managed to save enough from your little computer games to keep her in the lifestyle she deserves?" Something snapped inside me. I stood up so fast, my chair toppled backward. "How dare you?" I was shaking with rage. "You sit here in your expensive clothes, in your massive house, acting like you're better than everyone else, when you're nothing but small, cruel people who've never earned a single thing in your lives." The room went dead silent. "You think wealth makes you worthy? Look at yourselves. You're all so busy showing off your money that you've forgotten how to be human beings." Dad's face turned purple. He stood up, matching my stance. "That's enough. I've had it with your ingratitude, your poor choices, your defense of this fortune hunter." He turned to face the table, raising his voice even louder. "Let me make this absolutely clear, as of this moment, Abigail Stewart is no longer my daughter. She is disinherited, cut off completely." Then, with a theatrical flourish, he gestured to my cousin Michael, who'd been quietly preening at the other end of the table. "This is my new successor. My nephew, who understands the value of family tradition, of maintaining our standards." The relatives burst into applause as Michael stood, bowing slightly. "Thank you, Uncle David. I won't let you down like some people have." I looked around the table at these people I'd once called family. At my mother, clapping enthusiastically for my replacement. At my cousins, smirking with satisfaction. At my aunts and uncles, nodding approvingly at my public humiliation. "Come on, Zane," I said, taking my husband's hand. "We're done here. Permanently." The next few years passed like a whirlwind. Zane's cryptocurrency investments had been just the beginning. He used that capital to launch his own tech company, developing innovative AI solutions for businesses. Within 3 years, TechVision Enterprises was valued at over $500 million. The same internet money my father had mocked had transformed into an empire. I watched with pride as my husband's name began appearing in business magazines and tech journals. 30 Under 30, Most Innovative CEO, Tech Visionary of the Year, the accolades kept coming. But what made me proudest was how success hadn't changed him. He still opened doors for people, still remembered every employee's name, still wore simple clothes, though now they were tastefully expensive rather than cheap. I wanted to find my father and show him all these headlines. Show him how wrong he'd been. But we hadn't spoken since that disastrous birthday dinner, and honestly, I'd found peace in that silence. Then the invitation arrived. "You are cordially invited to celebrate the wedding of Rebecca Stewart." I stared at the thick cream envelope in disbelief. The same cousin who'd mocked Zane's table manners, who'd made snide comments about his clothes, was now inviting us to her wedding? "Look what came in the mail," I said to Zane that evening, holding up the invitation. He read it carefully, then looked at me with those kind eyes I'd fallen in love with years ago. "Maybe we should go. In my culture, we believe family is sacred, even when they hurt us." So there we were, walking into the grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton, where Rebecca's wedding was being held. The reaction was unexpected. "Oh my God, is that Zane Hassan? The TechVision CEO? Did you see his interview in Tech Weekly? I heard he just closed a deal with Microsoft. Can I get a picture with you, Mr. Hassan?" The same relatives who'd once looked down their noses at my poor immigrant husband were now falling over themselves to get his attention. Former critics were now eager fans, shoving business cards into his hands, asking for investment advice, begging for photos. I watched as Zane handled it all with characteristic grace, smiling for photos, answering questions politely, making everyone feel heard and respected, even those who'd never shown him the same courtesy. Your husband is absolutely brilliant, gushed Aunt Patricia, the same aunt who'd mocked his table manners years ago. Did you know he was featured in Forbes? I just smiled, thinking how funny life can be. The fortune hunter they'd accused him of being had built his own fortune, bigger than anything the Stewarts had ever imagined. But unlike them, he wore his success with humility and kindness. I should have known something was off when my parents made a beeline for our table. Mom was wearing her most ingratiating smile, the one she usually reserved for wealthy potential investors, while Dad had plastered on his best business face. "Darling," Mom cooed, air-kissing my cheeks. "And Zane? We've been following your incredible success in the news. So proud to call you family." I couldn't help myself. "Really? The same poor immigrant you couldn't bear to have at your table a few years ago?" They flinched, but recovered quickly. Dad cleared his throat, loosening his collar, which, I noticed, wasn't from his usual luxury brand. "Water under the bridge, sweetheart. Family is family, right?" Then came the real reason for their sudden change of heart. Over the wedding appetizers, the story spilled out. Michael, their precious replacement heir, had nearly destroyed Stewart Pharmaceuticals. In his eagerness to cut costs, he'd signed contracts with shady suppliers. Now they were facing multiple lawsuits for selling counterfeit medications. "The FDA is investigating," Dad said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The banks won't touch us. We're in trouble, princess. The legal fees alone." Mom dabbed at her eyes with her napkin. "We've had to mortgage everything." Dad reached across the table, placing his hand over Zane's. "Son, I know we got off on the wrong foot, but you're family. And family helps family, right? We just need a loan to tide us over. A few million should do it." I saw Zane's face soften with sympathy. My husband, always so quick to forgive, was already reaching for his checkbook. I placed my hand over his, stopping him. "Family helps family?" I repeated, my voice ice cold. "Funny, I remember you specifically saying we weren't family anymore. In fact, didn't you disown me? Twice?" "Now, Abigail," Dad's voice took on that warning tone from my childhood, "after everything we've done for you. You taught me some valuable lessons, Dad," I cut him off. "Like how not to give money to strangers. Isn't that what you always said?" His face turned that familiar shade of purple. "You ungrateful little." "And about keeping high standards," I continued, my voice carrying just as the wedding DJ asked everyone to raise their glasses to the happy couple. "So I'm sorry, but I don't associate with people who sell fake medications to sick people just to save a buck." Dad exploded, jumping to his feet. "How dare you? After everything I've done for you. I raised you, educated you. And disowned me," I finished, standing calmly. "Twice. Let's make it 3 times, you can disown me again if you'd like, but it won't change my answer." Taking Zane's hand, we walked out of the reception, my father's curses following us just like they had years ago. Only this time I was smiling. That was 3 years ago. James keeps me updated on family news, not that I ask. The mighty Stewart Pharmaceuticals went bankrupt. The mansion where I grew up was sold at auction. Dad and Mom downsized to a condo, selling their luxury cars and Mom's precious jewelry to pay legal fees. Sometimes I think about that dinner years ago, when Dad called Zane a fortune hunter. Life has a funny way of showing us who people really are. My poor immigrant husband built an empire through hard work and integrity, while my respectable family lost everything through greed and shortcuts. But you know what? I learned that real wealth isn't about money at all. It's about having people in your life who stand by you when it matters, who lift you up instead of tearing you down. By that measure, I'm the richest woman in the world. My father, David, worked as a train driver, and my mother, Sarah, was an office secretary. They already had my brother Michael, their pride and joy, who was 5 years old when Mom found out she was pregnant with me. She discovered it late, when I was already moving inside her. They didn't want another child, one was enough, they said. We should get rid of it, I overheard Mom telling Dad one night when I was around 6, recounting the story to him for what must have been the 100th time. But those damn doctors said it would be risky for my health. We had no choice. I was that sickly kid, constantly battling one thing or another. Colds, flu, ear infections, you name it. Mom had to take so much time off work to stay home with me that she eventually lost her job. I remember the day she got fired, she came home, looked at me with such disdain, and said, "Well, Amber, I hope you're happy now." The only bright spot in those early years was my grandmother, my father's mother. While Mom would barely touch me when I was sick, Grandma would sweep into our house like a warm breeze, bringing soup and kisses, even when I was contagious. "Come here, my sweet girl," she'd say, wrapping me in her arms while Mom watched from the doorway, shaking her head. "Mom, you'll catch whatever she has," Dad would warn. Grandma would just laugh. "Love is the best medicine," she'd say, kissing my forehead. She helped us financially too, which was the only reason we managed to stay afloat during those years. Mom made sure I knew this, regularly reminding me how much of a burden I was on the family finances. Michael was everything I wasn't: healthy, athletic, the apple of our parents' eyes. While I spent my days in bed or at doctors' offices, he was out playing soccer, winning medals, making our parents proud. They'd beam at him during dinner, asking about his day, his friends, his dreams, while I pushed food around my plate, invisible. Then, almost like magic, when I turned 8, my health took a turn for the better. It was as if my body finally decided to cooperate. No more constant illnesses, no more missed school days, no more doctor visits. Mom was able to go back to work, though her career never recovered to what it had been before. Finally, Mom said when I made it through my first month without getting sick, "Maybe now we can have some normalcy around here." But normalcy, I would learn, didn't mean what I hoped it would. It just meant I was healthy enough to fade into the background of our family portrait, a shadow behind the golden child that was my brother. Grandma kept supporting Dad and our family, making sure we had everything we needed. But what really showed her love for us was when she set up education funds for both Michael and me. "Education is the key to everything in life," Grandma would tell us during our weekend visits to her house. Her eyes would sparkle as she spoke about our future. "With good education, you can achieve anything you dream of." I spent a lot of time at Grandma's house, not because my parents wanted me to bond with her, but because they wanted time alone with Michael. It became such a routine that I kept a toothbrush and pajamas at her place. "Your parents are taking Michael to his soccer tournament this weekend," Grandma would say, trying to mask the sadness in her voice. "We'll have a girls' weekend, just you and me." I remember one particular Saturday when I was watching TV at her house. Mom had called to say they'd be late picking me up because Michael's basketball game went into overtime. "They won," Grandma said after hanging up the phone. "Your brother scored the winning points." "That's nice," I mumbled, already used to hearing about Michael's achievements. "What would you like to do, sweetheart?" Grandma asked, sitting beside me. "You never talk about your interests." That's when I broke down and told her about the ice skating classes I'd been begging Mom and Dad to let me take. I'd seen the ice rink at the mall and couldn't stop thinking about gliding across that smooth, shiny surface. "Mom said they can't afford it," I explained, picking at a loose thread on my sleeve. "But they just paid for Michael's new soccer gear and basketball shoes last week." A few days later, I worked up the courage to ask about singing lessons. There was a choir at school, and the teacher said I had a nice voice. "Honey, we spend all our extra money on your brother's activities," Mom said without even looking up from her phone. "He's really showing promise in sports. We need to invest in his future." "But Grandma set up education funds for both of us," I argued. "Couldn't we use some of that?" Dad stepped in then, his voice firm. "That money is for college, Amber. Michael needs these activities for his college applications. You understand that, right?" I didn't understand, actually. I didn't understand why Michael got to try everything he wanted: soccer, basketball, swimming, track, while I sat on the sidelines. I didn't understand why they went to every single one of his games, but never asked what I might want to do. I didn't understand why being their firstborn made him so special and me so forgettable. The pattern continued through elementary school and into middle school. Every time there was a choice between Michael's activities and anything I wanted to do, Michael won. They'd sit in the bleachers cheering at his games, posting proud parent moments on social media, while I did my homework alone at Grandma's house. When Michael got accepted into the most expensive college in the next state, our parents couldn't have been prouder. Money wasn't even a question, they'd make it work, they said. After all, this was their son's future we were talking about. "We're so blessed to have such a brilliant boy," Mom gushed during his send-off party. "He's going to do amazing things." I stood in the corner, holding a plate of cake I didn't want to eat, watching them fawn over him. Dad had his arm around Michael's shoulders, both of them grinning as Mom took photos for Facebook. Then came the weekend visits. Every other weekend, like clockwork, they'd pack their bags and drive 6 hours to see him. I was never invited. So I'd stay at Grandma's house, scrolling through my phone, watching their weekend adventures unfold on social media. Photo after photo, video after video, Mom, Dad, and Michael at restaurants, at football games, exploring the city together. They looked so happy, so complete. A perfect family of 3. The captions were what hurt the most. "Weekend with our pride and joy. Best son ever. Making memories with the light of our lives. Family time with our only hope for the future." Finally, after months of this, I couldn't take it anymore. They were packing for another weekend trip to see Michael when I confronted them. "Why do you pretend I don't exist?" I asked, my voice shaking. "You never mention me in your posts. You never take me with you. It's like you wish I wasn't here." Mom barely looked up from her suitcase. "There you go again, always complaining." "I'm not complaining, I'm just—" "You should be grateful you're even here," she cut me off, her voice sharp. "Or did you forget I wanted to have an abortion?" The words hit me like a slap. Dad just stood there, checking his phone, as if Mom hadn't just said something incredibly cruel to their daughter. That's when it finally clicked. All these years, I'd been trying to find some deeper explanation for why they treated me the way they did. Maybe they were stressed about money. Maybe they were overwhelmed with 2 kids. Maybe they just didn't know how to show love to both children equally. But no. It was much simpler than that. They just didn't like me. They didn't want me. They never had, and they never would. I was the child they were forced to have, the one who ruined their perfect family of 3, the mistake they had to live with. Standing there in our living room, watching them pack for another weekend with their only child, because that's how they saw it, I felt something inside me break. But it wasn't the shattering pain I'd expected. Instead, it was like a chain snapping, freeing me from the desperate need to win their love. Michael's 20th birthday was a big production, like everything else in his life. Mom and Dad not only drove to his college town, but they also arranged to bring along his best friends from high school. They rented out an entire restaurant and planned a huge surprise party. "You'll stay at Grandma's that weekend," Mom informed me, not even pretending it was a question. "We'll be too busy with the party arrangements." I watched the whole thing unfold through the live stream on Instagram. Mom was doing her usual social media coverage, making sure to capture every moment. Michael's shocked face when he walked into the restaurant. The cheers from his college friends. The emotional speech Dad gave about his only child, making him proud every day. But something was different this time as I sat on Grandma's couch, watching it all on my phone. The familiar ache in my chest wasn't there anymore. "Would you like me to turn it off?" Grandma asked, noticing me watching the stream. "No," I replied, surprising both of us. "I'm actually okay." And I was. Somewhere along the line, the pain of being forgotten had dulled into acceptance. I still had Grandma, who showed me what real love felt like. She didn't need social media posts to prove she cared about me, she just did. 2 years later, when I was 17, Michael graduated from college and dropped the big news: he was getting married. His bride-to-be, Patricia, was 35, divorced, with 2 kids of her own. She also happened to be loaded. Can you believe our luck? Mom squealed during dinner the night Michael brought Patricia over. Our son has found such a wonderful, established woman. Patricia sat at our dining table dripping in designer clothes and jewelry, while her 2 children played on expensive tablets. Michael looked at her like he'd won the lottery, which, in our parents' eyes, he had. We're going to throw you the most amazing wedding, Dad declared, already pulling up venues on his phone. Nothing but the best for our boy and his new family. The plans grew more extravagant by the day. Premium venue, gourmet catering, live band, ice sculptures, the works. The costs kept climbing higher and higher. One evening, after hearing them discuss flying in some famous chef for the wedding, I finally asked the question that had been nagging at me. Where are you getting all this money from? I asked during dinner. This must cost a fortune. Mom and Dad exchanged a look I couldn't quite read. That's none of your concern, Amber, Mom said dismissively, waving her hand like she was shooing away an annoying fly. The important thing is making a good impression on Patricia. This wedding needs to be perfect. I looked down at my plate, that old familiar feeling of being an outsider in my own family washing over me again. But this time, there was something else too, a nagging suspicion that they were hiding something. Well, it was sudden. I was deep in my exam preparation when Mom called. Her voice was shaking as she told me Dad had been in a train accident. My stomach dropped. Despite everything, he was still my father. The hospital corridors were eerily quiet when I arrived. I found Dad's room easily. Mom was already there, hovering by his bedside. Dad was awake, propped up against white pillows, his face bruised but not too severely damaged. His eyes were fixed on his phone screen, thumb scrolling restlessly. Hi, Dad, I said softly. He barely glanced up. Has Michael called? He asked Mom, completely ignoring my presence. Not yet, honey, Mom replied. I'm sure he will soon. I stood there awkwardly, feeling like an intruder in this scene. The steady beep of the heart monitor filled the silence between us. Finally, Mom turned to me, her face twisted with worry, not for Dad's health, I would soon learn, but for something else entirely. Your father made a mistake, she said bluntly. He violated some safety protocols at work. The company's refusing to cover his medical expenses or pay any compensation. Dad shifted uncomfortably in his bed, still staring at his phone. We need money for his treatment, Mom continued. A lot of money. Without thinking, I blurted out, what about my education fund? The one Grandma set up? We could use that, I don't mind. Dad's health is more important than college. I expected gratitude, or at least acknowledgement of my offer. Instead, Mom let out a sharp, bitter laugh that made me flinch. Oh, Amber, she said, shaking her head. That money's long gone. We used it for Michael's wedding. We needed to make an impression on Patricia's family. The words hit me like a physical blow. I stood there, trying to process what I was hearing. They had taken my education fund and spent it on Michael's wedding. And now? You need to get a job after graduation, Mom declared. Take out a loan. Your father needs this treatment, and you need to help pay for it. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I stared at my parents, these people who were supposed to love and protect me. In that sterile hospital room, surrounded by the smell of disinfectant and disappointment, I finally understood the full extent of their betrayal. How could you spend my education money? I demanded, my voice rising despite the hospital setting. That wasn't yours to spend. Grandma gave it to you specifically for my future. Mom's face hardened into that familiar look of contempt I'd seen so many times before. But this time, instead of shrinking away, I stood my ground. You have no right to demand answers from us, she spat. None at all. You should be grateful you're even alive to ask questions. Or have you forgotten that I wanted to abort you? The words hung in the air like poison. I'd heard them use my almost abortion against me countless times before, but this time was different. This time, they'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. I ran. Past the nurse's station, down the sterile corridors, through the automatic doors, and into the parking lot. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get my phone out of my pocket. Through tears, I managed to dial Grandma's number. "Sweetheart," her warm voice came through the speaker. "What's wrong?" Everything spilled out in a rush: the accident, Dad's treatment, my stolen education fund, Mom's cruel words. As I spoke, my voice kept breaking, but Grandma listened patiently to every word. When I finished, there was a moment of silence before she spoke, her voice steely with determination I'd never heard before. "Pack your things," she said firmly. "All of them. You're moving in with me. Right now." I'm so sorry I didn't step in sooner. I drove home in a daze, pulled out my suitcases, and started throwing in everything I owned. Clothes, books, the few precious mementos I'd collected over the years. I was halfway through emptying my dresser when I heard the front door slam. "What do you think you're doing?" Mom's voice cut through the room like a knife. I didn't stop packing. "I'm leaving, I'm going to live with Grandma." "Oh no, you're not," she said, stepping between me and my suitcase. "Your father needs someone to take care of him at the hospital. I'm exhausted from all this. You need to step up and do your part." I laughed, a hollow, bitter sound that surprised even me. "My part? Michael's your precious golden child. Why isn't he here helping? Where's your perfect son now?" Mom's face crumpled slightly, and for the first time I saw something besides anger in her eyes: fear. "Michael, he can't help right now," she admitted, sinking onto my bed. "Things aren't good with Patricia. She doesn't give him any money. She just shows him off at parties like he's some trophy husband. And now," she took a shaky breath, "now she's threatening to throw him out. He has nowhere else to go. He'll have to come back home until he finds a job." "A job?" I couldn't help but scoff. "Michael's never worked a day in his life. How long do you think that will take?" "That's why we need you," Mom said, her voice taking on that manipulative tone I knew so well. "Your father needs treatment now. We can't wait for Michael to find work. You need to help us." I zipped up my suitcase with finality. "No, I'm done. You stole my education fund. You've treated me like garbage my entire life. I'm not going to take out loans to fix your mistakes. I'm not going to put my life on hold to take care of the father who never cared about me. I'm done." "Amber, you can't." "Watch me." I grabbed my suitcases, walked past her frozen figure, and headed for the door. At the threshold, I turned back one last time. "Try asking your only child for help. I'm sure he'll figure something out." The drive to Grandma's house was a blur, but with each mile, I felt lighter. By the time I pulled into her driveway, I was crying again, but this time, they were tears of relief. It took less than 3 days for my mother to turn my departure into a social media spectacle. The same Facebook account that had pretended I didn't exist for years suddenly couldn't stop talking about me. Heartbroken, her first post began. "Our youngest daughter has abandoned us in our time of need. While my husband lies in a hospital bed, she refuses to help her own parents. Instead, she's run away to live with her grandmother. How did we raise such a selfish child?" The comments started pouring in immediately. Distant relatives and family friends who'd only seen the carefully curated version of our family life were quick to condemn me. But then came the other voices, the ones who had seen the truth over the years. My cousin Emma commented, "Are you going to tell everyone how you ignored her for years? Or should I?" My Aunt Rachel chimed in, "Funny how you never mentioned Amber in your posts until you needed something from her." Then came my Aunt Lisa's post. As Mom's sister and a family law attorney, her words carried extra weight. "Sarah, I need to warn you publicly since you're ignoring my private messages. You are publicly defaming your minor daughter. Amber is 17. By law, you are still responsible for her care and well-being. The fact that she felt compelled to leave home and that you're now engaging in a social media campaign against her could attract attention from Child Protective Services. Is that what you want? Because I can assure you, if they investigate, they'll find a lot more than just these Facebook posts. Mom deleted her original post after that, but she wasn't done. She showed up at Grandma's house the next morning, barging in without knocking. Mother, she addressed Grandma, ignoring my presence completely. You need to talk some sense into Amber. This little rebellion has gone on long enough. Grandma set down her coffee cup with deliberate slowness. I'd never seen her look so stern. Rebellion, she said quietly. Is that what you call it when a child finally stands up to years of mistreatment? Mistreatment? Mom scoffed. We gave her everything. Everything? Grandma's voice rose slightly. You gave everything to Michael. You spent Amber's education fund, money I specifically set aside for her future, on his wedding. A wedding that was nothing but a show to impress a woman who's now threatening to throw him out. You needed to think about both your children's futures, Grandma cut her off. Instead, you burned through money like there was no tomorrow. Well, tomorrow's here now, isn't it? And no, I won't be paying for David's treatment. Mom left in tears, but they weren't tears of remorse, they were tears of frustration that her manipulation hadn't worked. As the door slammed behind her, Grandma reached over and squeezed my hand. Within a month of my departure, my parents were forced to sell our family home to cover Dad's medical expenses. They moved into a tiny 2-bedroom apartment in a less desirable part of town, and then Michael showed up on their doorstep. Patricia had finally had enough of his lazy, entitled behavior. She'd kicked him out with nothing but his designer clothes and the expensive watch she'd bought him for their wedding. He arrived at our parents' new apartment expecting the same royal treatment he'd always received. At first, they tried to maintain the illusion. I heard through family gossip that Mom was still cooking his favorite meals and Dad was making excuses for why Michael couldn't find work right away. But reality has a way of breaking through even the strongest denial. Did you hear? Grandma told me one morning over breakfast. Your mother finally told Michael he needs to get a job. He said they owed him a comfortable life since they'd never prepared him for the real world. They had a huge fight about it. Meanwhile, I was building my own life. I graduated high school with good grades, not that my parents noticed, and Grandma helped me enroll in the local community college's accounting program. It wasn't the prestigious university I'd once dreamed of, but it was a solid education that would lead to a stable career. I even landed an internship at a small accounting firm downtown. The pay wasn't much, but the experience was invaluable. My supervisor, Mrs. Chen, actually appreciated my attention to detail, something my parents had always dismissed as being too perfectionist. Living with Grandma was healing in ways I hadn't expected. We developed a comfortable routine, breakfast together before I headed to classes or work, dinner in the evening where we'd talk about our days. She actually listened when I spoke, asked questions about my life, celebrated my small victories. Then came the day she asked me to accompany her to her lawyer's office. Just some paperwork I need to update, she said casually. I sat in the elegant office, trying not to fidget as her lawyer, Mr. Peterson, pulled out a document. I'm updating my will, Grandma announced. I want to make sure everything's properly arranged. My heart stopped as Mr. Peterson began reading. Grandma was leaving everything to me, the house, her savings, even her cherished collection of antique jewelry. Everything. Are you sure? I whispered when we left the office. What about Dad and Michael? Grandma took my hand. Your father and brother have taken enough from you. I won't let them take anything more. This is your future I'm protecting now. I hugged her tight, fighting back tears. I won't tell them, I promised. Good, she smiled. Let them figure out their own futures for once. That night, as I lay in bed in what had become my room, really my room, not just a space I occupied in someone else's house, I thought about how life had changed. My parents and Michael were struggling in their small apartment, fighting over money and blame. Mom had stopped posting on social media entirely. Dad was back at work, but demoted to a desk job. And me? I was thriving. I had a grandmother who loved me, a future I was building for myself, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly wanted. Sometimes the family you're born into isn't the family you're meant to stay with. Sometimes the best thing you can do is walk away and build something new. Something better.